Now let's take a look at another issue making headlines right now, and that has to do with corporate governance. Now the issue of corporate governance, risk and compliance has evolved over the years from a compliance-driven effort toward increased focus on performance. GRC, as it is known, refers to principled performance, and it involves departments like internal audit, compliance, risk, legal, finance, IT, HR, as well as the lines of business, executive suite and the board of directors. Now, how have businesses, companies and corporations aligned themselves to these practices in the global space? Richard Smith is a partner with RSM UK, and it joins me to take a look at how much of these tenets are incorporated in the global space. Thank you so much, Richard, for coming on the program. When we talk about corporate governance, risk management and compliance, it looks as if so much have been said about it, but how much of these have we implemented in our businesses globally?
Globally, it really does vary, first and foremost, across the globe. In some countries, governance is much more advanced than in others. But I think what's emerging, and I can really reference mainly the UK, which is obviously the area I know best, and what's come out recently from our own Financial Reporting Council is that governance must start at the top. In your introduction, you mentioned the business suites and the board of directors, and there's a very clear recognition now that governance must start from tone at the top. In fact, the FRC has just introduced something called the Culture Coalition, which has produced 7 principles which must be employed by businesses if they're going to have effective governance. So really, the first and most important point to make is it starts at the top, and from there on, it should work better if those at the top lead properly.
So there is the issue of accountability now, and those for those in the board of directors. But I wanted to look at governance issues. If I want to draw an instance from what happened at VW emissions scandal, I'm sure that's a very popular story that you're aware of, which the company was accused of concealing emission result. Now, in fact, yesterday, the U.S. Justice Department reported to have found evidence of Volkswagen, that's a German company,
yep,
acting criminally in connection with the emissions cheating scandal that actually plunged the automobile company into crisis. How well, or rather, how does all of this weigh on the issue of confidence? Because if the board of directors have to be accountable, how much of this scenario, for instance, would weigh on the confidence issue in a globally competitive business environment?
Well, clearly, a lot of the processes we put in place in businesses to ensure that we protect our reputation, and our reputation can only be founded on being honest with our customers and delivering that which we say we deliver. Clearly, in the VW case, that wasn't the case, and it meant that as a result, they've lost a lot of customers. They've been fined, as you say, in the US. Cars have been returned. So the consequences of not instilling a culture of openness and accountability, which I think are the 2 key words here, are particularly key. Had there been a proper culture from the top, instilling that culture with all the staff, it's less likely that these things would have happened. Probably what's happened here, in common with what's happened in many scandals, is that the incentives put to staff in terms of bonuses and profits were based on the wrong things, so it encouraged the wrong behaviours.
Okay, talking about incentives, have been a cause to actually cut down on how much executives, CEOs are earning around the globe, going by the reality of a weaker economic growth. Does that also relate to the fact that corporate governance must also address issues of wages of directors?
Very much so. And in the UK, there's been a big push to reduce the multiple by which, if you take the average salary of an employee to the chief executive, the multiple is way too big. And there's a big push to ensure that executives are remunerated not just on the basis of short-term profits, but long-term sustainability. So they're no longer incentivized to, if you like, fix the books to make a profit for a bonus. They're incentivized to make the business sustainable for the good of its employees and its customers.
Now, there's been increased regulation. We mentioned the UK Financial Regulatory Authority, growing focus on social responsibility as corporate turmoil across the globe has called into question long-standing corporate governance practices and stimulated criticism of same. How much of this is changing the role of directors in the boardroom worldwide?
I think one of the things that has focused the mind of directors in the boardrooms are some various pieces of legislation. For example, in the US, you have the FCPA, the Foreign and Corrupt Practices Act. In the UK, we have the Bribery Act. And all of those things encourage companies to be more open and accountable in the way they do dealings, particularly across the globe. So, for example, if a UK company were to breach the Bribery Act here in Nigeria, the UK directors would still be held liable for those actions. So there's a lot of legislative emphasis, but equally I think it's important to note that legislation is only good if you enforce it. In the UK we're quite good. In other countries, I've got to say, it's less obvious.
So would you say that regulations have been weak in some parts of the world when it comes to corporate governance implementation?
I think, without mentioning specific countries, yes, they have been weak, but it's not so much that the framework isn't there. It's that those who empowered to enforce the framework are not willing to enforce it for a whole range of different reasons, maybe political pressure, maybe just culture. But certainly it's not a lack of framework, as with all things. It's implementing that framework and making it real and enforcing the regulations.
So it just goes beyond the boardroom now, from all implications. So corporate governance regulations go beyond the boardroom.
Very much so. I think everybody in an organisation has a responsibility to ensure that they comply with the rules, regulations and control framework within the entity. But as I said at the beginning, unless they see their superiors are also complying, it's less likely that they will. So it very much comes back to the tone at the top, the culture of compliance and also openness and accountability. Those are really two key words.
Now, the global economy is actually really under the weight of slower growth. Like I mentioned earlier on, companies' earnings have dropped significantly. And what risks do all of this pose for directors who want to continue to ensure they stick to global standards without compromise?
Difficult question to answer. In this context of the pressures directors are under, clearly, if your business is not performing as you'd like it to, there's a greater incentive to cut corners, to maximise profits in the short term, to win more business. I think what we have to do is back to what we were saying just now, is make sure that the consequences of cutting those corners are made apparent and are dealt with, such that there's no incentive to cut corners. They know that if they're going to transgress the rules, there will be some retribution of some form.
So talking about going back to the issue of accountability, the impact on clients and customers alike, how do you think corporate governance can help boost confidence with those for which you're in business, for the reason for which you're in business?
I think, first and foremost, the openness in reporting, financial reporting, but not just financial reporting, but reporting around corporate social responsibility, provided that's taken seriously, can give confidence for investors and customers alike, pardon me, that they're dealing with a reputable company. Certainly in the UK, the way things are moving is that those companies that are trusted and have a trusted brand are generally trusted because they're honest with their customers and people will go to them. Those companies which are less open will tend to have less business.
I would like to also draw your attention to the issue of ensuring that the processes for implementation and compliance with the code of corporate governance are in place. And how does internal controls help to ensure that these requirements are followed through by the leaders in the companies?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have
Do we have strong internal controls?
Well,
in most corporations around the world to enable them meet up with the standards of corporate governance?
To say, do we have strong internal controls is a hard question to answer. What we need to know is, first of all, that the companies themselves have identified the risks they face, that the board of directors are aware of those risks and have put in place controls. The gap you find in many companies is they don't know if those controls are strong because they don't actually seek the assurances from internal audits, from third parties, that the controls are operating in practice. So one of the keys to any governance or GRC framework is not just having the framework and the controls, but having an assurance as a director, as a manager, that those controls are actually operating in practice. And I think often that's where the gaps emerge, that people don't check that what people are doing is what they're supposed to be doing.
So what lessons do you think Nigeria can learn from the examples you've given in the UK, for instance?
I think, at risk of sounding like a stuck record, I think it really does have to start from the top. In the UK, we have a cliche which you may have heard, that a fish rots from the head. Now, that's a very, very important phrase to use because I believe that right from the political masters of the country through to those who run the businesses, they have to set the tone. If they set the tone, there's a much greater chance that the people who work for them will follow and that the customers will therefore trust the products and services. So the key lesson, I think, is let's get the culture right. It's not an overnight fix, but definitely that's where you need to start.
It's not an overnight fix, but we've seen the government in Nigeria, for instance, having to go after those who are alleged to be corrupt individuals who have stolen public funds. Does that in any way, would that in any way help to boost the confidence in government, saying that beyond the boardroom, the government in the country is also helping to instill confidence in various institutions as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I can reference an example. We also work elsewhere in Africa, in Malawi, and we've done a lot of work into corruption within the Malawi civil service and government. And one thing that we're really pleased to see, and it's beginning to change the culture, is the government has now taken the bull by the horns, if I can use an English cliche, and begun to prosecute a number of individuals in the civil service and politicians for fraud. That has sent a very clear message that this no longer will be tolerated. So taking the Malawi example, if that's happening in Nigeria, that can only be a good thing.
Richard Smith, partner with the RSM, Governance and Compliance, RSM UK. Thank you so much for coming on the program. We'll continue the conversation on corporate governance with the Nigerian environment under review. We'll be talking to David Rage, who is the partner, SIAO, RSM Nigeria, after the break. Just before we go, just to let our viewers know that today the debt management office will be selling 110 billion naira worth of bonds. There you have the numbers on your television screen, and these bonds will be in 3 tranches for those who are interested, both individual and institutional investors who would want to be part of this auction. You can take advantage of the guarantee that you get in participating in buying federal government bonds. Looking at the numbers on your television screen, we have that maturing July 2021. Amount on offer is 40 billion naira, and the coupon for that is 14.5%. For that maturing January 2026, that's about 10 years from now, the amount on offer is 30 billion naira at the coupon of 12.5%. And that maturing March 2036, amount on offer is 40 billion naira at the coupon of 12.40%. And the Nigerian Insurance Corporation has said that banks would no longer be able to sell its insurance products. We'll give you details of this in the course of the week and see how that would impact on the insurance sector. We'll go on a break now. I'll be right back.